Welcome to The Call to Rise, the podcast for sacred rebels, visionaries, and conscious changemakers. Here we sit down with the people birthing the new earth, weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy to build movements that heal, transform, and uplift our world. I'm Mackenzie Darling, your host, inviting you into honest conversations, practical tools, and hard-won wisdom to awaken your power and to inspire you to answer the call to rise and to meet this moment in history. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be introducing this week's guest on the Call to Rise, Cynthia Tina. Hello, Cynthia. So nice to be with you. Thanks so much for saying yes.
Yeah, Mackenzie, great to be with you as well. Thank you for hosting this time together. I'm really looking forward to it.
Cynthia and I got connected maybe just about 2, maybe even 1 month ago on my own journey of really awakening to the fact that I want to be an intentional community. As the global awakening is happening right now, people are really returning to tribalism and to this movement of belonging. And so I came and I found Cynthia, who has really been a big part of that movement. So really excited to get into the umbrella movement of belonging and our return to tribal living and living with land in the right relationship. So let me read your bio really quickly so people can get on board with what you've been up to. Cynthia Tina helps people discover intentional community living for better housing, health, and happiness. She has traveled to 200 plus intentional communities around the world and resides in a Vermont eco-village in her self-built natural home. Her speaking, business, and consultancy have contributed to the growth of numerous community-led housing projects. She is the founder of Community Finders and Eco Village Tours, as well as the author of the forthcoming book, Return to Belonging. Formerly a co-director, Cynthia is a partner and educator with the Foundation for Intentional Community. She's a trustee on the board of the International Communal Studies Association and a former trustee of the Global Eco Village Network. She holds a degree in sustainability from Goddard College, as well as a certificate in permaculture and eco-village design and yoga teacher training. Amazing. Well, I love to read the bio, obviously, to get people excited about the conversation. But I think the best way to start off the podcast is, how did you get into this? What brought you to this threshold?
Yeah, like most people, I did not grow up in an intentional community. Grew up in pretty mainstream, normal America. And, I had a sense of community growing up with some of my neighbors, but it was a fairly conventional upbringing with parents who are incredibly loving and supportive. But as I've gone deeper down this path of more alternative forms of living, they've been scratching their heads like, what is our daughter doing? But so grateful for their support, because it's really enabled me to be able to explore my curiosity. Even as a child, I was really drawn to nature, spending time outdoors. I started a garden really young and was so passionate about travel. I love to travel. I love to see the places in the world that I was learning about through books. I'm a huge reader. And so learning about, oh, there's this way to live and that way to live, and it doesn't all have to look like my white suburban, private school upbringing. And as I got older and I traveled more, I became more curious about places where people were really intentional about co-creating a life together based on shared values. And before I even knew kind of what the term intentional community meant, I kind of was drawn to these places. Visited my first intentional community at the age of 15. It was a place called Turtle Island in North Carolina. I spent a summer there learning about indigenous cultures and traditional Appalachian food systems, and just spending a lot of time in nature. And then obviously coming back to my friends in high school who didn't really understand, well, why are you spending your summers in the woods? I also have a younger sister who's followed a pretty conventional path and lives in a city apartment and is climbing the corporate ladder, following in my parents. And so needing to translate what it is that I'm interested in to them. And I think that's been a core piece of my work even today is helping people, first of all, recognize that they have a choice. They don't just have to do the default way that we all get a job and, find a house or rent and through traditional real estate pathways. There's a much more intentional way to co-create a life with your neighbors, and that it is something that doesn't have to be scary or super alternative. I think the narrative around intentional community, even in the time that I've been part of this movement, has really shifted from commune, cult, hippies off in the woods to, wait, this is actually something that could be really beneficial for me, especially given our loneliness crisis and the housing crisis. Intentional community can be, for some people, a really great way to address those issues on the societal level and also create a more healthy and enjoyable life with your neighbors.
There's so many things that I want to touch on. You talked about veering off the normal path, and that obviously is the trait of a movement maker. And they can be ahead of their time. Part of their movement and their calling is around that educational piece. And you do a beautiful job of that. That's really what brought me into your community. I learned so much from you. So I really commend you on that. It's interesting. My brother-in-law often calls me, he's like, you're living a very bohemian life out in San Francisco. I'm originally, my roots are from Cleveland, Ohio, and a lot of people out there look at what I'm doing, especially in the psychedelic field, like, who is this hippie out here? But even psychedelics are starting to become more mainstream. And so I think these hippies might have been onto something. And I love that you bring in the travel piece. I'm a really avid traveler. I've been to probably over 70 countries. Travel is such a beautiful adventure where you get to break out of your box and be like, oh, there isn't just one way to live or to commune or to work, learn so many different things from looking at different cultures and different ways of being. So love that you bring that in. For our audience, talk about what is intentional community, intentional living, and can you talk a little bit about there's different types of that and how people, you have an amazing blog that you can point people to also, but can you share?
Yeah, happy to. Yes. And there's a lot more resources, free blog articles at communityfinders.com. So intentional community, the broad definition is a group of people who've chosen to live together or regularly share facilities on the basis of explicit common values. So when a founding group gets together and says, we want to create an intentional community, they come up with a shared set of values, vision, and mission that then future members buy into. So compared to, let's say, a retirement community in Florida, where sure, people are living close to each other, but there aren't these core deep values that everyone's getting behind. And in addition to that, it's a choice, right? Freely choosing to live in community. So typically when you join a community, there's some type of membership process that you go through. So it's a little different than just buying a home on the real estate market. You're really building relationships with your neighbors and then choosing to co-create, co-live, which might include making decisions together, resolving conflicts together, sharing resources and tools, and supporting one another in deeper ways than you would in just a normal neighborhood. And then within that wide umbrella, there's many different types of intentional community. Some are more based on home ownership, feel more like a traditional neighborhood, just with a little more social cohesion. And that's a great entry point for people who are new to this movement and don't want something that's too radical. And that's called co-housing. So when you hear the term co-housing, it doesn't mean people sharing a house together. It means people who are owning their own private homes within a shared neighborhood. That's kind of on one end of the spectrum, the more, let's see, mainstream version of intentional community. And then you can have everything in between, all the way to, some pretty radical forms of communal living that are striving to be activist communities or create a different future that is maybe striving towards more of a utopia or a better world for everyone. A lot of the communities that fall into this category have a very strong service component. They might include communities where people are living in closer proximity together, sharing housing, sharing, family space, raising kids together, more of that deeply connected village kind of dynamic. So everything in between. I like to say, if you can imagine it, it's possible that somebody else has too and might already be on the way to creating a community or has created one. And who knows, it might be open to new members and it's something that you could join. This movement is growing rapidly. We estimate that there are probably between 10,000 to 30,000 intentional communities globally. And that's not including religious intentional communities, which is also a form of intentional community living. You can think of, the Bruderhof or the Amish. I'm not including those groups, but just talking more about secular intentional communities.
For people that want to create their own communities, like what's that pathway?
Yeah, gosh. So if somebody's listening and they're like, oh, I've had a dream in my heart
Mm-hmm.
to create an intentional community, I would really, really encourage doing your research and spending a lot of time getting familiar with the landscape of what already exists. Because like I said just a minute ago, it's quite possible that something you're envisioning already exists. And it might be close enough of a match that you could join that community, because that's going to be a lot easier than going down the pathway of creating a new community, which they say like 2 to 7 years is the timeline that you'd be looking for that, depending if you're retrofitting existing housing or building on new land. And it's a big, risky endeavor. A lot of intentional communities start and then fail. The failure rate is similar to starting a new business, which is about 90% within the first year don't make it. So that's my trying to dissuade somebody because it does take a lot. But if you are committed and you feel like you have the skills and the drive and the ability to build relationships and find other co-founders, we definitely need more intentional communities in the world. So that is a really beautiful undertaking. And I would still encourage doing your research. Also, going to visit intentional communities. Often that's what makes the difference in terms of a community's long-term success is how much time did the founders take at the outset to learn from other founders, to do that network building, to learn from past mistakes and failures, to see a diversity of models. And that's part of why I created EcoVillage tours, to try to make it easier for people to go and experience a variety of different communities within a relatively short period of time and form those relationships with other founders that might serve them in the long run. And then from there, there's all manner of steps of setting out to put down to paper your values, your vision, your mission, finding those co-founders with skills that complement your skills. And then if you don't already have land or property, doing a property search. Yeah. And there's different pros and cons and pathways to the ways you do all of that, but that's the foundational steps.
Excellent. It's so interesting because someone building their own intentional community has so much resonance with building your own movement. When you're talking about doing that market research, going out and seeing what other people are doing, learning from the field, putting the right partnerships and the right coalition together. All of that is movement building. So it's interesting to watch it on a more micro scale, but really, and of course, you have the individual communities that are being built, but then the overall umbrella of intentional communities living under that too.
Yes, yes. It's often described, creating an intentional community is like starting a business, getting married with multiple people,
Yep.
and going through what many people call the hardest and longest, but most rewarding personal growth workshop of your life.
Yep.
Because we learn through relationship and through seeing ourselves in other people. And, if you're ready for that huge growth and transformation that's possible, then, good for you and go for it.
It really is, I think, the pathway to integration. In the westernized world, we're so individualized. And from a psychedelic experience, I'll bring that in where, I'm an entheogenic minister and I work with people ceremoniously. And then we do a lot of integration, where in indigenous cultures, there is no integration because they're integrating with their community all the time. They have that mirror back to them where it's like, oh, I'm now being able to practice in community. And so, even myself, as I was thinking about stepping into intentional community, a lot of my own stuff came up where I'm like, ooh, like, all right, how am I with conflict management and how am I with like stating my boundaries and all of these things that will definitely come rushing up. And I'm guessing that a lot of that has to do with the 90% failure rate of intentional communities. Would that be accurate?
None of us learned this stuff in school. We're taught to follow the teacher authoritarian figure and to compete with the other students for the best grades. And yeah, this whole cooperative culture is something that we have to relearn, because I do agree with you. Indigenous cultures, but just throughout most of human history, we lived in tight-knit social circles with intimate relationships with the people around us. And we are, as a human species, hardwired that way. We're hardwired to connect. It's only within the last few hundred years with the Western modern culture that we've become divorced from that very natural way of living. And that's part of why the title of my forthcoming book, Return to Belonging, because it's sort of a return to the way that we were designed to live. And a lot of research has shown that we are much healthier with social connections. And it is shocking how many, I think half of the American adults right now report feeling lonely on a regular basis. We are a very lonely society, and it is probably leading to a whole host of mental and physical health issues, not to mention the political divisiveness. And, you list the problems, you can probably trace it back to our disconnect.
Before we go any further, I want to speak directly to the revolutionaries that are listening. The ones who know that their lives carry a deeper purpose of service in this moment. If you can feel that you weren't meant to simply succeed inside the old systems, but to help reshape what comes next, this invitation is for you. I've created the Movement Maker Archetype Quiz, a powerful tool that reveals one of 7 leadership archetypes emerging right now to guide us through this threshold moment in history. This isn't about personality. It's about discovering your unique leadership medicine, the role you're here to play in our collective transformation. You can take the quiz at quiz.globalmovementmaker.com. That's quiz.globalmovementmaker.com. If something in you knows this moment matters, start there. A lot of these intentional communities bring in permaculture, and they're really centered around being in right relationship with the earth. Can you talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, when I said the word disconnect earlier, that's kind of what I had in mind in a really holistic sense. Not only social disconnect, but disconnect from place and from the world and the systems around us that are supporting. It's, not all intentional communities have a strong environmental focus, but it tends to be when you bring an intentional community together, you bring together intentional people who are also pretty intentional about their choices in life, their lifestyle, their career choices, and are very mindful about the impact that they have on the environment and the land. So some intentional communities have that as a core focus. Like the community where I live here in Vermont, we have permaculture as one of our values, and that shows up in our gardens. Actually, our whole land use management, but especially we have this big garden that everyone pitches in to help grow the food. And our aim is to grow more than enough, so we always have an abundance, so people can always come and take whatever they want. And people who enjoy gardening can get in there and garden. And people who have skills in other ways can contribute in other ways. And a lot of that is made possible through our economic system as a community. So it's another piece of all this. getting more connected with a economic system that's in better right relationship, creating more pathways for right livelihood that also can support the environment and social values and not be contributing to the future that we don't want. So some intentional communities do that in the extreme and have a lot of economic systems woven together. In the community where I live, we just pitch in a certain amount each month, and that goes towards a common pot that then enables us to maintain a lawnmower, nice zero-turn lawnmower as a community. So I don't own my own lawnmower, but I have one through extension of being part of this community. And all of the garden amendments and tools and road maintenance and access. So it makes a lot more possible. Especially, I think of the chickens. We have a flock of hens, and I only need to take care of them every Thursday. That's my chicken day. And otherwise, I don't need to worry about them. Somebody else has them, or if I'm traveling, somebody can cover my days. And it's just one of those things. I could never have chickens on my own with my lifestyle, with my traveling, but I can have them through community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just like a simple little way that really makes more possible when we can come together.
I love that you're pointing to really that sacred support. You don't have to hold everything on your own. And again, in that individualized lifestyle, even something so small as like I have my two cats. We were just talking about our cats before we jumped on this podcast. And it's like when I want to travel, it's hard for me to find someone to watch the cats, right? And so when you're living in a communal place, everyone's pitching in and taking care of things.
Can I share on the topic of cats? When I got my cat, my neighbor also got a cat, and they're brothers. Actually, we adopted them at the same time. So the one brother is at her house, one brother is at my house, and they grew up as kittens in the separate houses. But then when they got older, they're indoor outdoor cats, and they found each other and have become the best of friends. And the brother comes over to my house even and eats from my cat's food, which is fine. Sharing, right? Sharing.
Right.
And it's just the sweetest thing because he always has company and we get to raise these two kittens together. It's just again another beautiful little thing. I never have to worry, like you say, about care for my cat when I'm away. There's always somebody around who can help, and I feel very fortunate for that because I know like life is hard enough as it is. And then when you also need to figure out support systems for a pet or a child, or even when you need support, needing to coordinate and schedule and plan, it's just a lot of logistics that are made easier when we live in deeper relationship with our neighbors.
Another, I think, big part of this movement is also living intergenerationally.
Yeah.
Of support in this westernized world, like so many people are raising their children and having to put a lot on hold and sacrifice a ton, where before children were held more in a tribal environment where they got a lot of support and also were able to be raised by the village and had more sense of belonging from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, there's tons of research showing that this halo parenting or allo parenting, where in most traditional cultures, like the baby is held by a minimum of 10 different people throughout the course of a day. And we just don't have anything like that here in the world that we live in, this kind of strange, very modern way of living in isolated families where you have to pay a lot of money for that kind of child support. So I feel very blessed to be here. I don't have kids yet, but I hope to. And I am certainly surrounded by many of my neighbors who have families with young kids. And even just yesterday, my closest neighbor, she has two little girls. They're twins. So it's been a lot for her, and they've been building their house. And she was chatting with one of the little girls in our neighborhood she thinks she's like 13, and she's like just starting to like get into babysitting and like having a conversation with her. Well, what would be a good exchange and how would that work? And that kind of relationship is made possible through intentional community living. And I do see it in many other multi-generational communities where there can be synergistic relationships between the older kids taking care of the younger kids, or the more retired folks in the community who don't have as much on their plate being able to help out and pitch in. Just all kinds of informal and formal systems of support to help raise the village.
And with that intergenerational, I think what also is an interesting movement within the intentional communities is life and death. You
Yeah.
see in some of these intentional communities at home childbirths, and you see at home burials.
Yeah, yeah, just as you say, yeah. I think here in our community, half of the kids had home births here. We're in a pretty rural area, so some have chosen to go to a birthing center a ways away, but regardless of where the birth happens, the intentionality around it. We have blessing ways for the new mothers and like these food trains or meal trains so that the new mom always has meals, provided for her. And we even did, it was really sweet for one of the women at her blessing way. We all got like a string tied around our wrist. And then when she had the baby, we all were at a party and like all there together and could toss them into the fire together. And just like these, I don't know, just really sweet moments around that. And then also with the death as well. Yeah, our community has not yet had any people who've passed away, but we've had pets who've passed away, and we've done a lot of beautiful ceremonial burials for the animals here. And older, more established communities will oftentimes have a designated green burial site within the community. So yeah, intentional community is such a beautiful microcosm, I suppose, because we see in intentional community all aspects of the human life, all the life cycles, and get to try out new ways of doing these things that might be different than the mainstream ways. And so I like to say that the goal isn't for everyone to up and move to an intentional community. The goal more is to support those existing communities, help people learn from them, help people experience them, and maybe take elements back into their own life to implement wherever they're living.
I want to take a moment to invite you into something special called Alchemy, a 3-month one-on-one coaching journey for people who feel called to step into deeper servant leadership. In Alchemy, we weave together the insights of the Enneagram with the sacred container of plant medicine ceremonies so you can understand your patterns, release what no longer serves you, and rise as the leader that you're meant to be. If you've been feeling the pull to step into your gifts and serve from a place of clarity and integrity, I'd love to walk with you. You can learn more and apply at globalmovementmaker.com/alchemy. I think that governance is a really interesting thing that people can learn about through intentional living.
Governance, communication systems, conflict resolution,
Yes.
those are some of the strengths of intentional communities. I can't say like the solar panel is the most exciting thing going on in intentional community. It's more those social tools and agreements and processes. So yeah, I mean, we really stand on the shoulders of a lot of intentional communities in the early 60s, that kind of hippie era when they were figuring out how to do this. And a lot of that early methodology was based around consensus decision making, which today some intentional communities or even people contemplating starting a new community think of consensus decision making as a very slow process, and it can be, sitting around the circle, going around, making sure everyone's in agreement. But most modern practices of consensus are similar to other tools such as sociocracy, which is taking that original intention of consensus, getting people on board, finding shared agreement, but doing that through smaller circles and committees. Especially when you have a large group, this becomes critical. Bring things down to a smaller level of groups so you have that space for deeper conversation, before bringing proposals or decisions back to the whole group. So I mentioned sociocracy, that's becoming a pretty popular way for larger intentional communities to do governance. And there's a wonderful organization called Sociocracy for All. They have tons of videos and books, really great for learning about sociocracy. I will say, if you're a smaller community, like our community here, we're just 8 households on about 15 acres of land. And because of our smaller size, we're able to get away with a more casual form of decision making. A lot of our decisions are made through chatting around the fire in the evening and, kind of checking in with each other, gathering opinions, gathering ideas, so that by the time we come to the actual meeting, a lot of it has already been sort of massaged and sussed out, if you will, so we can make decisions faster as just a small group. There's also a really awesome decision-making practice called do-ocracy. Yeah, so do-ocracy, the idea being that individuals can take agency for doing what they see needs to be done with, some basic parameters of those shared values, checking in with other people who might be impacted by the decision. Yeah, because I think within many intentional communities, there's this interesting balance between the right amount of structure to support what needs to happen and not too much structure that it becomes overly bureaucratic and impedes things moving forward.
Yeah, I can definitely see the need for that balance there for sure. I'm curious what happens in different communities around rupture and repair.
Yeah, conflict. It's inevitable. It's just sort of something that not to freak out when it happens because it will. And it's part of that personal growth and learning about how we personally handle conflict and all of our trauma and triggers that come up and how we are in relationship with somebody. Most intentional communities have a conflict resolution policy, which really, I would say it really starts before there's conflict, because there's a lot of preventative things that can be done to help a conflict not turn into a big rupture, but to have little ruptures all the time, little releases of the tension. And a lot of that comes down to the communication practices, listening deeply, sharing feedback, asking for feedback, being open-minded. All of that is really essential. And then when a conflict happens, usually there's a tiered response of first trying to address it with that, the two people or two parties. If that doesn't work, bringing in a mediator. If that doesn't work, going to a larger group. So it's kind of an escalation. But yeah, communities, they go through phases of peace and conflict. And I think for those who are considering joining an intentional community and maybe vetting a community, not to feel too concerned if a community shares with you that they've had conflict. It's actually more of a warning sign if they say, we've never had conflict here.
Yep.
So that shows, something's under the surface for sure. Pay attention to how they describe how they got through that situation, how gracefully, what did they learn? What was the outcome? That's more important to pay attention to.
Okay. Good to know. And I want to jump to, you actually take people into all of these different intentional communities and you teach people what to look for, like what you're saying here and how to kind of vet these intentional communities. And again, you have so many amazing resources. So all of our listeners, I very much would invite you to go to her website. What's your website again for where all of these resources are?
Community Finders.
Okay,
so
perfect.
Communityfinders.com.
Okay, perfect. And I want to jump to your Eco Village tours because I just think that is the coolest and I want to go on all of them. So can you talk about how that came into fruition and how you built up that network?
Well, we started talking about love for travel. I have been visiting intentional communities throughout my 20s and then at some point I crossed the threshold of around 200 communities that I'd visited around the world. So I have learned so much through those experiences. I think there's tremendous value to be learned from visiting communities, whether or not you ultimately go and join a particular community. And it can be challenging. It's hard to figure out the logistics, get in touch with the people. They're, only available on certain days, or you're going alone, and that's kind of scary. So, how great would it be to have a travel company, like we book a tour on a, cruise or on a trip to go someplace, but we're going to visit eco-villages and intentional communities.
Hmm.
And that was the vision. We did our first tour in, I want to say it was early 2023. I had the vision for the company in 2019, but then,
Okay.
COVID happened and that kind of delayed us for a little while.
Hmm.
And to date, we have hosted more than 14 tours in 9 countries, connecting hundreds of participants with hundreds of intentional communities. And we have a ton of trips planned for next year. It's really growing quickly. It's very easy to put together the trips.
Hmm.
Like, that's the easy part because there are communities everywhere in beautiful locations. There's these amazing local guides that we've partnered with to put together the trips. So we're just on a roll with putting these trips together. And we've been learning a lot as a company about, oh, okay, which trips fill easily and which trips not as much, or the timing and the pricing and all of that. But I think we're on a good path with figuring out those systems and really want to expand globally to every corner of the world where there's an eco village that's ready to host us. We want to bring people there because it's critical that people get that exposure, the real in-person exposure to a different way of life. That's how you're going to have the mental shift to recognize that it's possible. You're going to learn the tools, you're going to meet the people, and be part of a network. We have a really strong alumni network of past participants and guides and communities. So we're very physically connecting those dots and bringing people directly to the communities.
Beautiful. I'm wondering if you can give any of your most like hard fought wisdom that you have learned for other change makers and movement makers that are building kind of similar things. Like I'm sure that they are arranging retreats and educational programs and communities worldwide that have alumni and different programming. What have been the nuggets of truth that you wish you had known before you had started?
Oh man. Well, I can really empathize with them because I know it's hard. I know there's ups and downs and big wins and hard losses. And I'm learning all the time. I'm really a voracious researcher and learner. One of the things that I've been learning and even experiencing myself recently is that there's something to be said about persistency. So many people quit too early.
Yes, that the truth.
And if it's really not working and you're not happy, sometimes it's better to quit early. And
Hmm.
that's a real art to know when to stick with it and when to let it go. That takes a lot of skill. But I find if you're able to stay consistent and consistently show up and put yourself out there and share not only the, beautiful finished product, but also the process and the work that you went through, your journey as a founder, that's really gonna create momentum
Hmm.
and credibility the
Yeah.
longer that you can last. So that's something I've been learning. I also think that there's something I've been learning recently. I've been reading a really great book. I think it's called Scaling or Scalability, because that's where we're at right now with Eco Village Tours. We're kind of getting
Hmm.
through the startup phase and ready to, okay, what's next? And a lot about that is about being very focused, having
Hmm.
a very clear goal. It can be a super ambitious goal. And the more ambitious, the better, actually, because
Hmm.
it forces you to be creative and to streamline. I think a lot in previous projects I've been part of, we've been kind of like an octopus, many different things happening, and oh, that's a great idea. And there's so many great ideas, especially within movement building, because the world needs so much. So within any topic, you're going to have a million different ways that you can address that need. But if you can really focus in and stay focused and not get distracted and simplify your systems.
Yes,
That's going to
simplify.
enable. Yeah,
Yeah,
man, I have to learn that lesson all the time, but yeah.
That's a really, really important one because, especially as movement makers, we have this visionary mind. And as you're saying, like ideas and creativity just flow and flow and flow. But until you can get that structured vessel of we are going to focus on this, that's what I really, a lot of people really have enjoyed about my movement maker incubator is I'm bringing structure to a very structureless thing. Like, how do you create a movement? And it is simplifying and finding that arrow of direction and then pointing everything towards that. Yeah, really important. Every episode of the Call to Rise podcast is about the changemakers and movements reshaping our world. But the podcast is just the beginning. On my Substack, I open the door wider, sharing my personal journey with movement makers, the wins, the struggles, and the behind-the-scenes rituals that help leaders birth what's next. If you're ready to go deeper into the frameworks and practices you hear me hint at here, join me at globalmovementmaker.substack.com.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what we're working on right now with these guides because pretty much every week I'm, approached by somebody like, I want to lead an eco-village tour or come to our community. And it's like, we have this great supply of so many communities and projects. And how can we support these guides to have a right livelihood and put on a successful tour and do that in a high quality way, but very quickly as well.
How do you vet the guides that want to come through? Picking which people should be part of like your leadership and your ambassadors.
Yeah, hiring is such an important skill. Man, and I've failed miserably in this regard. So,
Well, good. You have good lessons for us then.
yeah, exactly. I think that's part of it. I mean, one of the things I try to remember is trying to hire slowly and let go of people quickly when it's not a fit. I think in the case of our guides, we're really fortunate in that there has been so much network and movement building that I'm really just building off of. So many wonderful organizations we've mentioned in the bio, the Foundation for Intentional Community, the Global Eco Village Network, who host events and online meetings. And so when we have an idea, like we wanted to do a tour in Spain, I reached out to a few of my contacts there, and then they kind of like said, oh, maybe this person, and we have now a pool of applicants as well. That's pretty extensive. So from there, we have conversations and determine how knowledgeable are they about community living broadly? Do they have experience in community? How knowledgeable are they about the communities that we're going to visit and actually have relationships? Because that's what we try to do with our tours. You're not coming as like, "Oh, here's a group of tour participants." You're coming as like the friend of the guide who's friends with everyone who lives there. So you're coming as like a friend of a friend.
Right.
That relationship with the communities is critical, as well as, the person's professionalism. Most of our guides are also the drivers on some of our trips. They're the logistical coordinators. They're like keeping the time. They're like hand facilitating the whole thing. It's a lot. So we spend some time making sure that it's a good fit, but I feel so excited that there are so many people who have that capacity and that willingness to be tour guides.
I would guess that a lot of people would be very interested in what you're up to. I mean, it sounds like a phenomenal opportunity and job to have to be able to go around the world and meet such amazing, incredible people. And I really want to double click on that relational piece. I think in everything that we do, the relationship is really at the root of what makes something tick. Anything else that you want to bring to the table that we haven't discussed today? This has been a really beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
And ways that people can get in contact with you and work with you.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was something you said towards the beginning that I wanted to circle back to
Yeah.
about I suppose the perennial nature of intentional communities, because I really see my work not as so much revolutionary as it is highlighting what has been done over decades and decades, and really all of human history. There's been these enclaves of people trying out different models, and that diversity in of itself is what we need right now. We
Mhm.
need more people out there experimenting, trying different ways, seeing what works, pursuing a grand vision, failing miserably, sharing their lessons. That in and of itself is really critical for us as species to begin to rekindle that cultural diversity, the social diversity. That in addition to rekindling biodiversity, it's on that level, I think, for how we're going to move forward. So I'm really grateful to be part of that continuation of this long history of intentional communities and be a part of, hopefully a revival of interest in it, and see it become a mass movement where it's no longer abnormal to say, oh, I live in an intentional community, just like it'll be strange if you don't. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm working towards.
I love that you point to that because I think that the revolution is actually the remembrance,
Yeah.
right? Like we're remembering to reconnect to the earth, reconnect to one another, reconnect to the sacred. I also think it was great that you brought, we're in a time of collapse, which can feel obviously very scary and very anxiety inducing. And it's also a time to dream into something new. And so with collapse comes renewal. There's composting into something. And even with my own psychedelic journeys, that composting always brings about new bloom. And so we're into new bloom. And I think that new regeneration is really needed.
Yeah, great. Beautiful
Yeah.
metaphors. Actually,
Yeah.
if I have a little quote that I love by Paul Kingsworth.
Please.
The more things fall apart, the more the center cannot hold. The more new centers are seated on the margins, which is the only place they can ever grow.
Full goosebumps. I love that. I love that. And it's so true.
Yes. Great.
True.
Yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end this session. Anything else you want to share around how people can get involved with you?
So yeah, communityfinders.com. I got blog articles, which is being put together into the book coming out soon, probably this winter. I have a fun quiz you can take if you want to figure out which type of intentional community is a fit for you. And that's kind of the resources education side of things, all online. If you want to get out into the real world and get your feet on the ground, shake some hands, give some hugs in community, that is through EcoVillage Tours, ecovillagetours.com. And we have trips coming up this winter in Hawaii, Costa Rica, Bali, India, and then tons of trips the rest of 2026 that we've just announced for Europe. Yeah.
Incredible. Well, I certainly hope to join you on one of those soon. Before we got on the podcast, I was telling Cynthia that I'm excited. I'm actually going to Guatemala in a couple weeks and checking out a couple intentional communities there, seeing where it takes me. And I'm so grateful that I've met you, Cynthia. Look forward to seeing how your movement grows.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. Really appreciate the opportunity.
You
Beautiful to
bet.
connect with you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for listening to The Call to Rise. If today's conversation stirred something in you, subscribe and share it with a fellow movement maker. And join our community at globalmovementmaker.com. Till next time, keep leading with courage, keep weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy, and always remember to answer the call.